folks. Hope you're doing well today as spring rolls in across the country. We have had a very long winter, so I am enjoying every second of it here, having many more sunnier days in Ontario. And speaking about sunshine, today we're going to be shedding some light on Ontario's very own sunshine list. Today's video is going to be a mix of informative and conversational. I actually do want to talk about some of the hard facts, the origins, the historical trends of the Sunshine List, but I also really want to talk about everything that's really going on behind the scenes of the current list and kind of bringing the discussion into one place in time. I think a lot of Ontarians are still wondering if we should use the list, and I think this is a discussion 100% worth having. So I'm very much looking forward to having a little bit of conversation in the comments. So first things first, what is the Sunshine List? To put it simply, the Sunshine List is truly the practical application of Ontario's Public Sector Salary Disclosure Act, and that is a mouthful. For just ease of use in this video, I'm just going to refer to it as the PSSDA. PSSDA, yes. It's a tongue twister. So the PSSDA, we will get a hang of it by the end of this video, is essentially designed to create accountability and transparency from the government to taxpayers. As such, the Sunshine List is an actual list that is produced every single year. It's put together in January and then published in March, and it's supposed to capture every single public sector employee that made over $100,000 the previous calendar year. And that is $100,000 before taxes, because God knows we pay a lot of taxes here in Ontario. So why $100,000? Well, actually, the $100,000 amount is wrote directly into the PSSDA. And just to give you some context, the PSSDA was passed and the very first Sunshine List was produced in 1996. So the Sunshine List is basically like a pseudo Gen Z at this point in time. And I mean, to give you more of an idea, $100,000 in 1996 would be equivalent to about $166,628 in 2022. I mean, that makes sense. It's gone up. It's been almost 30 years. This inflation I calculated through the Bank of Canada calculator, so don't think that this is a number I came up with on my own. I am not that mathematical. And to give you some even more context, if you're interested, in 1996, the premier at the time was Mike Harris. And Mike Harris was really pivotal to the inception and the passing of the Sunshine List, or the PSSDA Act. Mike Harris was a progressive conservative, and he came after Bob Rae, who was an NDP leader, a very controversial NDP leader here in Ontario. He was elected in 1995, and really Mike Harris's kind of government time was flavored or tinted by this idea of cutting public spending, and he kind of deemed it the common sense evolution. Mike Harris was really keen on tackling the province's debt load and really decreasing it down. So through spending and tax policies, he was really big on getting rid of these excessive government jobs where people were redundant or just paper pushers or living kind of like a comfy government life. And this really seemed like a great idea at first, but I think it evolved into quite a few missteps later on, unfortunately, as he started to shut down hospitals and cut nursing jobs. And he really infamously compared nurses to kind of an obsolete government job, which I think today we can all agree we still feel the reverberations of the Mike Harris time, especially coming out of COVID-19 as we face critical nursing shortages, and there's been coming to light so many issues with long-term care. There's been tons of gaps identified in how seniors access care. Again, just to give more context, because I think it's important, very recently, as in of 2020, Mike Harris was exposed for greatly profiting off of his privatization of long-term health care. He sits on the board of Farwell, which is a very large and famous long-term care company in Canada, and he makes an income well over 200 grand every year with that company. So we can say that at the very least, the Sunshine List has some flawed origins, may question its long-term validity. But for better or for worse, the Sunshine List does remain a crucial part of accounting for government spending here in Ontario. Since 1996, government officials have said about $243 billion in taxpayer monies has been accounted for through the Sunshine List. If you're wondering how the Sunshine List got its name, I was too. I always kind of thought the name had come from the idea that the people on the Sunshine List live this sunny, happy life because they're rich and affluent. But actually, the Sunshine List actually got its colloquial real name because it is shedding light on what actually is happening with government spending. And this whole idea of illuminating government expenditures makes it sunny, I guess. The PSSDA was amended in 2004. This amendment was largely done to kind of address just some changes in language and terms and corporations that happens with time. I guess in 1996, when the act was initially formed, Hydro One and the Ontario Power Generation, they were initially termed under the Electricity Act, and then when they became corporations, those corporations were put into the act. In 2013, the Sunshine List went way more electronic with dedicated websites. There's the sunshinelist.ca and the sunshinelist.com, and to me, which is kind of cool and also kind of strange about these websites, is they're not actually government run. They're completely run by citizens who are interested and believe and feel the list has an important role to play. The websites, including all calculations, analyses, search features, they're all created without support or affiliation from any public entities. And really, these sites are truly fantastic when you're researching the Sunshine List for any media, project, personal reason, and they're really user-friendly. You can just literally type into the toolbar who you're looking for, the name of their company, the companies themselves if you want an overall snapshot, and you can find it. They're way more user-friendly than the public list documents that the government posts as of late. And this is really cool because obviously these sites are needed. Thousands of people visit them all the time. I guess what's messed up to me about them is the government just didn't take initiative on this at all. And I think the government could do better record keeping, to be honest. I am glad to see that there's some ads on these sites because obviously the site masters need to be able to recoup some expenses. But I do wonder maybe what'll happen to these websites long term as the people who run them maybe age out and phase out of running them. But I guess we'll see what is to come. In 2014, Alberta then followed Ontario's lead by making their very own Sunshine List. Now, I believe their list, the rules are a little bit different. I think they do employees over 104K, and they also do I think entire public disclosure lists, which are anonymous, but they just say what different positions make within the province, which is a smart idea in a different way. And even since this date, some cities within Alberta have taken up the same type of list, like Calgary, for example. And these compensation disclosure lists have been useful for these provinces for different reasons or similar reasons as Ontario. Alberta really started to use these compensation lists when actually Alison Redford, very controversial premier, resigned in that province. Alison Redford, honestly, I would like to make an entire video on her because I think that's a hot mess that I would like to know more about. But essentially, she made a ton of discussion, tons of headlines when she resigned because her former chief of staff and other top staffers that had resigned were being given these six-figure severance payouts. And the idea of carelessly spending taxpayer money plagued all of Alison Redford's time really as premier. That wasn't a new thing for her, but the idea that she had too many staff to begin with, and then the Albertan government had to pay about $1 million to see those staff resign is insane. I also saw online British Columbia has a Sunshine List at about 100K cutoff. Manitoba runs a list since about 2018 that's now 75K cutoff. Saskatchewan runs a list at a 50K cutoff, so much lower than Ontario. And the city of Halifax, since 2016, has been running a list with a 100K cutoff. Sunshine List definitely isn't just unique to Ontario. There's lots of them all over Canada, but the idea that the list might be flawed or all the repercussions of the list, I have to be honest, a lot of that discussion is happening mainly in Ontario, and I kind of wonder if that's just because we've had the list longer. I've even noticed in some of the interviews for the different provinces, if you look on YouTube or any other news outlet, often some type of Ontarian academic or Ontarian economist or politician is kind of consulted in discussing the list because we've just had it, I think, here for so much longer than other places. It's kind of a uniquely Ontario thing. At present, just so you know, there's no federal or national equivalent to the Sunshine List. The idea of getting disclosure lists for public servants in the federal service is not a thing, as of right now anyway. And I just want to note, in 2015 to 2017, there was a ton of discussion online about what the future of the Sunshine List would be. And I really don't know why this discussion was happening for sure, but I feel like personally a lot of it was coming up because of pending elections, and also I think a lot of the Liberal spending was kind of put under the microscope in that time period. It's kind of building on where there were missteps in spending in other places, people were looking at the Sunshine List. And then here in 2020, I have to say the annual Sunshine List still promotes a ton of conversation, creates some gossip, feeds the political fodder, and there's always controversies. It feels like even just in a small level every time that list comes out. And I guess I just was hoping with this video to kind of start up the conversation again about the utility of the Sunshine List, especially as we come into another political election here in the province of Ontario. Also, let's be honest, COVID has kind of been looming over us the last few years. It has created a strain to the provincial financial bottom line. Just kind of the idea of like tightening up the spending, I'm sure is on a lot of people's minds going forward here. Now, this part might be a little boring, but I thought I would just include it so we all are on the same page of how the Sunshine List is made. So it's the employer's job to make the Sunshine List here in the province of Ontario, and there's lots of corporations that are on the Sunshine List that you would expect to be there. For example, schools like public school boards, municipalities, hospitals, universities, the LCBO, the Ontario Power Generation, and more. But there are a few that don't have to report. That makes it a little bit complicated. Nonprofits being one of them. So nonprofits that get more than $120,000 in transfer payments from the government and make a certain percent of their gross revenue can be required to disclose on the Sunshine List. And I guess the idea of this is to keep those smaller nonprofits that don't really get that much of the government pie off of it. And what would be like a significant gross income? It's about 10%, especially for those companies that get anywhere from $120,000 to $1 million. There is no nonprofit that's included on the list that trades in services or government goods. Hydro One is another tricky company because they became public in 2014. They don't need to disclose all of their employees on the Sunshine List. However, Hydro One does need to disclose the incomes of their CEO, their CFO, and 3 of their highest paid executives. So you're gonna see about 5 people from Hydro One landing on that list consistently. And that's about it. Employers who are preparing their Sunshine List have to put the names, titles, salaries, and the taxable benefits of that person's job on the list. Now, the salaries can be a little bit misleading. They generally are salaries, but just so you know, things like severance payments, per diems, retainers, and any other legal monies that were paid out could be included in the total salary that that person earned. And then the taxable benefits, again, another little tricky thing. They can be anything that is a part of someone's pay that is non-cash but can be measured. I think a really common example, especially for things like municipalities, using a work vehicle. But then there's also things like gym memberships, travel, gift certificates, cell use, subsidized housing. I actually had a nursing gig once that had subsidized housing, and that again plays into your bottom line that you earn at that facility. Yet the PSSDA doesn't require anyone to disclose what those exact taxable benefits are. So you just see the number that they earned and not really like where that came from per se. Mistakes have been made on the list, and you can find those mistakes in the compendium at the very end of the government list. I'm not sure how those are rectified on the websites, but I imagine that they are. If an employer does not produce a Sunshine List, there can be some severe repercussions for them. They can have their government funding withheld. They can be subject to an audit, and they can actually lose and complete entitlement to their government funding if they don't comply within 1 year. And unfortunately, this has happened, some bizarre circumstances, which we will get into. As for employees, no employee can request or be granted a non-disclosure agreement for their income when signing with a government agency as a result of this Sunshine List. In the past, and obviously you probably gathered this from like my historical overview, but in the past, really, Sunshine List was filled with like some eye-popping salaries. Today, you'll see a lot of different people on the Sunshine List. Everything from nurses, firefighters, police officers, people just from all different backgrounds that are maybe considered mid to low level entry government employees. But obviously the higher incomes usually belong to executives of hospitals, OPG, and well, yeah, mainly OPG. Let's be honest, because even though the Sunshine List is like mandated by the government, it's very much an individual experience, right? Yes, it's institutional. Yes, your workplace mandates it, but it's really your name on the bill when that list comes out, if you're lucky enough to make it. When it comes down to it, when people are going to look at that list, they're not really looking for your department, your unit. They're looking at you, your name, your specific role, where you work, what you do. The spotlight is all on the person at the center of the income. So maybe you know because you made the Sunshine List, or maybe you can just imagine like me. But think what happens when that Sunshine List rolls out March 31st and your name's on it. What do you think is going to be the repercussions for you, those around you? Well, I know it sounds silly to maybe think about these things, but there actually is some research that has been produced on the pros and cons of being placed on these income disclosure lists. For pros, obviously there's a little bit of respect, and I don't think this respect is always like broadly felt, but I think this idea of being respected by other top earners, this idea of maybe just being like, oh, this is very fancy. You're maybe seen as a boss a little bit by your family members or people around you.
It can be a source of like, yeah, that's cool.
Some economic experts also believe as a pro that being on the Sunshine List, you can attract higher incomes, whether that means switching from the government to the private sector or even just building your way up in the government. The idea is like, you have such a great income, you're gonna attract other positions with a good income because they know your value, know your worth kind of thing. And then I think another really big pro that isn't always discussed as much in the research, but I think for me, myself personally, if I were to make the list, I think looking around at who else is on the list around you, in your income bracket, who's above you, it can kind of give you some career goals. It can be like, okay, my next role could be the person above me, and I see how much they make, and I see where the gaps are in our experience or our education. How can I close that? How can I get to that next role? It could be like motivation. And now the cons, because I think there's a lot more cons to being on the Sunshine List than not, to be honest. Actually, the idea of being on the Sunshine List makes me feel really uncomfortable. And the main reason is like, it's complete lack of privacy. I mean, yes, there are times where you can be proud and respected of the hard work you did, but the idea that you don't have a choice over how much people knew you make is kind of nerve-wracking. Not everyone should know, and nor do they need to know your income. I think a good example is like you're somewhere with like a friend or family member or whoever, and the bill comes up and they're like, well, you made 150K last year. I know you can afford this. And I think that's important because like, just because someone made a lot of money doesn't mean they live a lifestyle that's in congruence with that always. Some people like to be quite frugal. Some like to do lots of tithing with their income. It's just, income is very personal, and having it very public is nerve-wracking. I've seen people in the news kind of discuss this idea of loss of privacy is very voyeuristic. Not that I'm saying all people do this, but there might be like a certain group of people that just go on and creep all the different incomes of people they know or they used to know. Kind of like a weird Facebook search. I did find one report online of compromisation of safety, and I do think this is a good point to note, especially if you have a complex, dynamic social life. The report basically had said that a woman had made the Sunshine List and her stalker was able to locate her at her new employer and actually come there and come after her, and she had to like remove and file charges. What a nightmare. Even something like a nasty divorce settlement, being on the Sunshine List might just kind of twist the knife in an already troublesome situation. And then I think the major thing noted in the news was the idea of colleague envy, rivalry. The idea that you look around your workplace and you see the people that made the Sunshine List, and then you're going to your boss and saying like, I don't understand why they make this much and I don't make this. And I think a lot of people have pointed this con out as a way of saying like the Sunshine List isn't that great because it can actually inflate income in a department or unit because everyone feels like they need to earn comparable amounts. But from an individual standpoint, I think for me, it would really suck because it kind of makes your workplace less collegial. There's like a higher turnover of staff possibly because people might not feel valued, and it could just create more tension when you need to work as a team. And I know some people in the news have really characterized being on the Sunshine List as leaving them open to being shamed and criticized by people they know or people they even don't know. And this kind of also leaves the door open to mental health concerns. Making a Sunshine List, can it really drive up someone's anxiety and depression? It probably does. There was one study out of the States, I think it was LA, and they said that they did see the Sunshine List make a drop in very elite earners. And I would say that is kind of reflected in Ontario too. But the thing about this drop in elite earner salaries, it's a small drop in the bucket type of con. It's like a soft con because you're making 1.5 million and you drop yourself to 1.3, you're still making a lot of money. So I guess the question is, when has the Sunshine List been helpful? When has it been unhelpful? And when has it done absolutely nothing to the government bottom line? These are the questions, right? Politicians being beholden to the list. I think the list has been extremely helpful at tracking the incomes of the most famous, influential, interesting people in Ontario that we kind of all keep an eye on and want to hold to account. Leaders, mayors, etc. So for example, thanks to the Sunshine List, we know that Doug Ford made just shy of $209,000 last year, and we know that Toronto Mayor John Tory made about $197,000 last year. And this is interesting because when you track something like the Premier's pay back in 2017, Kathleen Wynne made $208,000. So to see that the Premier's only making like about $1,000 more over a 5-year period is actually kind of like reassuring. Doug Ford isn't cutting himself a big massive check. A more specific time that the Sunshine List has been extremely helpful was in 2014 with Western University's Amit Chakma's big double dipping salary scandal. University president Amit Chakma created a huge public outcry when it came to light that he had paid himself his salary twice. This resulted in a big shuffling of the Western Board of Directors after actually the chair, Chirag Shah, I'm probably saying that wrong, he ended up actually stepping down because of the scandal, and his reputation was really greatly tarnished as he was found to kind of like have a history of executing these side deals with university leaders. So yikes. Give you the nitty gritty. President Chakma had essentially signed a 5-year contract when he came to Western, saying that he was going to work 4 years and in his 5th year take a leave. So when the leave year came up, he's like, this is a critical time for the university. I feel like I should stay and work through this. So as a result, I'm going to take my pay for leave, and I'm also going to take a salary because I'm working. I get why this created outcry. I also get a little bit like why they thought maybe that was okay, because if I take a vacation day but I get called in for overtime, I still get paid for the overtime. So it's tricky. I think it was made bad because of how much he gets paid. So essentially the base pay was $440,000, and then with his double pay, he ended up making an income in 2014 of $924,000, which at the time was an exponential amount of money for a university executive leader. The Western University Board of Directors initially really stuck to their guns with this decision. They had renewed Chakma's contract to 2019, and their kind of outlook was that, he was worth the value. He was a world-renowned academic. He had brought so much to the school and experience, and he had also hit all the benchmarks for growth that the university wanted in student grades and enrollment. So really, it was kind of like he had brought this money in by doing his job. Fortunately, though, the public didn't see it this way, and they demanded an apology from Chakma, which he did provide. A review was asked to be done, which was done, and found out that this idea of the double pay was actually some type of weird pension padding scam devised on the part of the Western University chair and Amit Chakma himself. I guess with a public sector salary freeze, they were trying to max out his pension any way they could. The Ontario legislator also called out for a cap on university employee pays, but this did not come to fruition. Typical government. All of this amounted to Amit Chakma not taking a pay in 2015, or at least giving his pay back to Western University, and then essentially coming back onto the Sunshine List in 2016 at his base pay of $440,000. All in all, it ended up that the taxpayers didn't lose any additional money, and thank God for the Sunshine List, because if we didn't have it, we wouldn't have known he would have taken that extra pay cut. It might have been released in the minutes of the Western University Board Director meeting minutes, but who checks those, Nobody. So that case alone saved taxpayers about $500,000. Even of more benefit, this entire scandal actually brought to light some changes in the elite earners and the pay gaps between faculty at the University of Guelph and the University of Waterloo. Kind of just like brought the light back to university employees and pegging them down for how fast and how quickly their change in pay was occurring. Amit Chakma, just in case you're wondering, there was like a vote from the school senate to try and his contract and get him out, and unfortunately that vote did not pass because I think the Senate at the time didn't have all the information that we have now, that there was this greater scheme to financially profit from getting a double salary, and it wasn't just kind of oversight or misjudgment on the part of the board. Another time the Sunshine List was really helpful, and I included this because I thought this one was even more egregious than the Amit Chakma incident. 2011, when the Orange Air Ambulance executives got held under the microscope. Previous to this incident, Orange Ambulance, which is like a government publicly funded medical transport team if you don't live in Ontario. I think the out west one is called Stars. Ours in Ontario is called Orange. But essentially in 2011, their CEO and president, his name was Dr. Chris Mazza. He got really exposed by the Toronto Star for making an income of $1.4 million. Wasn't on the Sunshine List. Why was that? Well, essentially, at the time, Dr. Chris Mazza was like, me and the other execs, we take our pay from non-public funds. And it was found that Orange had all these kind of like side private companies that offered services. This was really interesting because it was like, how do we know you're not blending private and public funds? And the truth was we really didn't know. There was a huge audit, a year-long audit done by the government. Dr. Chris Mazza initially stepped down on medical leave and then he was eventually fired from the scandal. And there was other execs that made huge incomes that I don't think ended up losing their jobs or ended up being disclosed, but it was a huge deal because it was like, hey, you know, if you're gonna do private and public together, we need to find a way of defining it. And what ended up being the outcome was it was just like, you know what, Orange, you guys are all going on the Sunshine List, so we know exactly what's happening in this institution from now on forward. I think that was a good call. You need to know exactly how funds flow through a company, and that needs to be transparent. And the Sunshine List, once again, was the fallback and keeping them accountable. I think it even came out beyond the $1.4 million in salary that this Dr. Chris Mazza and other execs were taking like trips like all over the world. They were eating very fancy dinners. They built a beautiful executive office with a high-end fitness center and like special smoothies and just really all the fixings of a luxury lifestyle in a publicly funded company. So strange they thought they could get away with that. Time the Sunshine List was unhelpful was in 2014. The government had a fluke situation where there was essentially 27 pays in a calendar year versus the normal 26. So as a result, over 2,200 employees that normally don't make the list were suddenly on the list. And it was kind of like this gross inflation. And then as a result, also the next year, that less people were making the list than the year previous because everyone's income was shuffled down. This artificial inflation, deflation just kind of took away from the value of what the list could be. A time the list has done absolutely nothing. And I hope anyway, other Ontarians will join me in saying this because this isn't like, I think, articulated perfectly in the media, but this is how I feel, is the case of OPG or the Ontario Power Generation. They do a lot of the hydro here in Ontario. They own a lot of the renewable and non-renewable energy sources. I think for the last 7+ years, OPG has been the creme de la creme of the Sunshine List. They've been the top end. In 2021, 4 of the top 5 earners are from OPG, and each year these CEOs, execs are seeing these huge inflation rates on their pays, making well over $1 million each. And this is problematic for 2 reasons. One, the climbing hydro costs across this province is really detrimental, especially to low-income families. To have hydro constantly taking a bite out of every single paycheck that they have is horrific, and it can really mean the difference between eating or safe housing long term. The other thing that makes this really problematic is it's not that OPG is a company that's in good financial standing. Earning these high income wages would be different if you were really excelling and succeeding as a company, and that isn't the case. In 2017, OPG approached the government about borrowing $16.8 billion to do upgrades, to fix things, to just make the company better. And an internal review and audit was undertaken and found that actually this company is not using their money wisely whatsoever. They could cut money in corporate costs, administrative costs. There was also the idea of like repairs and minimizing the pensions of workers. I think the main thing though, this idea of corporate administrative costs being an issue and being grossly inflated, was the first place to start, to be honest. And the fact that the exec incomes keep going up has shown me that they have actually not taken any of those steps that are pretty basic and essential to getting your company back on its feet. Apparently, the company was asked between 2017 and 2021 to cut about $500 million in spending. I hope they did it, but the wages of the execs really don't show that. So finally, what is the future of the Sunshine List? So yeah, I mentioned it earlier, but just so my own personal biases are clear and known, I have never made the Sunshine List ever. since I do work as a government employee. But a major reason I want to make this video is because a family member of mine who has worked for the government for like decades, never made the Sunshine List, made it this past year. And it was so interesting to see how family, friends, people in the public kind of reacted to them making the Sunshine List. It just erupted this whole discussion. And I thought a lot about this discussion because I thought it was super interesting, both in content and nature, because like previously no one had cared what this family member of mine had made until they made the Sunshine List. As a result, I went to Google to look to see what other people were saying about the Sunshine List and went down this entire rabbit hole. Really discovering a lot of drawbacks and troublesome revelations about the list that we've really discovered overusing it for the last almost 30 years now. Thought I would just run through kind of the major issues of the list. Of course, though, if you know of any more, please share below. I would love to hear about it, or if you disagree with some of these revelations. And I've tried my best to provide the two points of views because I have to be honest, every drawback of the list, there's usually someone coming in saying, well, the counter perspective of that drawback is this. So it's kind of hard to know what is the best way forward. And I can see why maybe as a result the government hasn't changed anything with the list. First thing I alluded to as a major drawback of the list and a common complaint online is the index for inflation. And it's not just inflation in general, it's the social changes to monetary value. It is the overall increased cost of living. And it really hasn't been modified or reflected in the list. And I really hate to say it, like it's horrible to say because I don't even make that much, but a six-figure income really isn't what it used to be in this country. And the issue with the list saying stagnant at $100,000 becomes an issue when you think of the initial purpose and idea behind the list, which was to really capture the elite earners in the government. It wasn't to capture everyday people, it was to capture those kind of making unreasonable incomes above the actual cost of living. And this idea of mid to low level employees being captured by the list, it really is occurring with more and more frequency, and this can be evidenced by the size of the list increasing each year. Well, in 2021, one website pointed out that about 244,000 people made the Sunshine List. And if we actually had accounted for inflation, that list would have been reduced by 89.9%. So really just a smaller chunk of that huge number would have been on the list. I guess for me too, and this is really speculation on my part, the idea of how we live has changed so much. If you live in Toronto, that income that you're going to need to live there is going to be so much higher than maybe a smaller place. But also more than that, I think in general, people just have bigger taste for expensive things. Consumerism definitely hasn't gone away. People want to go on nice trips. People want to live in beautiful homes. People want to spend their money and use their money. There's been this normalcy for lower employees to have more and more pressure placed on them to make money. And I can say this as someone who's kind of like in a mid-level government job. Even putting the inflation aside, I guess I should say, I can see more and more lower middle income people making the list or making that $100,000 cutoff, not even necessarily because the government's been so generous with their pay and matched inflation, but because people are working overtime like crazy. People are opting to be part-time to get those benefits paid out. People are not taking their vacation and having it paid out. Employees are optimizing their hours or taking on call shifts, just anything they can do to get that little bit more in their bank account to pay for the things that they need. And also, have that nice lifestyle that we all long for, right? No one wants to live in poverty. No one. And like the best instance I can give of this is from my own work. I have seen more and more of my colleagues make the list, and it's not necessarily because my pay and our pay jumped up. It's literally, I know those employees have worked every single weekend. They have come in for every overtime shift. They've made themselves available for all the work things. And often, sometimes being the government employee too, especially with the pandemic, we were kind of the breadwinners because no one else could go to work or people's work was inconsistent or what have you. It really is a complicated situation. And like the colleagues of mine that have made the Sunshine List, I should be clear, have like just barely made the list. They make like 102, 103 grand. Like it isn't like they're like 150 grand or anything. And all this is to say, I think there is a solid argument to change the Sunshine List cutoff to 120 125 or 150 grand. Again, it comes back to what we talked about earlier, privacy for those employees who are really just trying to make a comparable income with other people in our society. You know, finally, by keeping the list elite or like tracking inflation, really, you are able to see who's taking the biggest piece of the pie most easily. So one journalist kind of said, because the list is kind of flooded at 250,000 people almost now, the idea of finding and tracking individuals is getting more and more difficult because they're kind of hidden in plain sight, so to speak. However, and there is always a however to these discussions, I get that some members of the public may want to keep the 100K cut off for the following reasons. If the government is going to recognize inflation with government employee incomes, they should maybe do so in their other policies, public spending, etc. It's not enough to say, okay, employees can live this inflation-based income lifestyle and then not also recognize it in Ontario Works or disability. I think keeping the 100K cutoff is attractive to a lot of people because it really allows us to see how fast government jobs are growing or not growing, kind of like a Glassdoor program. How self-serving is the government towards themselves? For instance, unions may find it helpful or unhelpful to have a sunshine list. I think one interesting study found that government employees across all sectors are paid 11.5% more than the private sector, which I could see as being definitely problematic. And I do support these secondary outlooks. My only statement would be that if we are going to run with either of these ideas, we either need to amend the PSSDA to reflect inflation, or we need to amend it to reflect the purpose of the initial list. Second, and this is like an extremely small group of people, so I could see it not being like a really big critique, but I just thought I'd throw it in there. The sunshine list doesn't account for people who make a combined income of more than 100,000K across multiple government organizations. And I get this is probably a small number of people, but we have seen CEOs and execs do some shady things. So I'm just saying, you know, it is possible for someone to take a few chunks out of the pie or a couple big chunks out of the pie and make a large income and not be able to report it. So if you made like $99,000 somewhere and 99 somewhere else, you wouldn't make the sunshine list either way. And that's no way to get like super rich, but again, if you're making incomes from the government and taxpayer money and it should be accounted for, should we not account it from all agencies? Possibly. Third, I kind of have the sneaking feeling, and like you can tell me if you agree or disagree with this, my critique of the sunshine list would be that it might only be the tip of the iceberg for some people or a portion of the income. And I know, yes, taxable benefits have to be included, but that being said, there may be other benefits that really aren't covered by the sunshine list depending on the organization you're with. What I mean from this is, and I think this would just be like really the high-end earners of the sunshine list, but like who's to say if you're a very high-end earner on the sunshine list that you're not also getting like side gigs or private consultation fees or whatever. We just really don't know if being a high-income earner attracts other income opportunities, if that makes sense. I guess I just think of like YouTubers and big YouTubers, not this channel. Obviously make your income from YouTube AdSense and from sponsorships that are all disclosed, but all those little side things that you get might add up. Maybe you get like a brand trip. Maybe you get, what's those boxes? Maybe you get gifted lots of items. Things kind of can go under the table a little bit more and are less clearly disclosed. I guess what I'm just trying to say is, yes, you made the sunshine list for this income. There might actually be other perks that we don't know about. Finally, and arguably my biggest personal issue with the sunshine list, and I know there's lots of good counter arguments that I will go through to these, but I think for me, there's a lot of people that aren't captured on the sunshine list. And by this, I mean independent contractors. And independent contractors could be literally anything from an IT service corp, physician, construction crew workers, corporate lawyers. Really, all of these people kind of get left off the list. They're not accounted for even though their main income is still taxpayer money. Now, like to be clear, some physicians do make the sunshine list. These are our salaried physicians that are running like public health units or have leadership positions. But anyone who bills OHIP we don't see reflected in the Sunshine List. They could be making less than $100,000. We just honestly don't know because they don't make the list or are accounted for. Of course, the counter argument is for any business that is paid as a contractor by the government that they have a lot of overhead fees, whether it's employees, supplies, actual office space. And I guess I would kind of argue back, is there not some way we can find out what the income or the profits from that company are, or what the take home that person personally claimed on their taxes? Because at the end of the day, any amount that goes into running the business should not be held against that person, but they would have taken some type of paycheck, paid taxes on some level of income. Even if there is some situation on mixed funding, like we saw with Orange, or another really good example of mixed public and private funds is the police. I guess in 2015, I think, Toronto police had to start reporting all of their income, even if it was mixed. So if they were paid for a duty shift for a movie or a private event, even though a taxpayer didn't pay for that event and it was through public money, whatever money they made still was counted under taxpayer funds and made them go onto the Sunshine List. Does that make sense? So if you made $100,000, but $20,000 of that was doing from private events, you still made the Sunshine List as a police officer. And I think the same should be applied to these independent contractors. Francesca Grosso wrote a really good piece for the National Post, kind of just saying that the PSSDA need to be amended if we're going to add physicians to it, which I don't disagree with. But she also did write, we need to be aware of who is obscenely billing or overcharging the healthcare system. And I am all for that. I want to know what physicians are making $500,000. I want to know who are doing 8 weeks of back-to-back-to-back call and, really just kind of milking the system for everything that it's worth.
Do I know somebody who's doing this?
What remains the best way to ultimately hold these contractors to account still remains to be seen, but I do think it's worth noting Alberta is currently working on a system to account for their independent contractors, so maybe we can learn something from them in the future. What are some possible alternatives to the Sunshine List, or maybe complementary pieces to the Sunshine List? I read one article that proposed this idea that the government employees of a region should not make an income that exceeds the medium or middle income of that area, and there shouldn't be this substantial gap between the community income and the government employee income. And I think this idea is really interesting because it brings up that idea of service to your community. You're not there to be some big wig looming over the community itself. But I kind of disagree with it because the idea of hiring what a community can afford is problematic, because where are government employees going to want to work? They're going to want to work in the communities that have the most money, that are the most affluent because they're going to make the most. And it's going to leave those poor communities even greater service need. And from my experience of working in healthcare, I find that the communities that make the less income or have the least resources need the most social help from government workers. This idea would just create a lot of competition between communities and really just rob those who need government services the most. But it's an interesting idea, and it's the idea of humbling yourself to meet your community, which I think is a beautiful concept, but maybe just on paper. Another alternative that's been proposed by the NDP community, specifically Andrea Horwath, is the idea of just capping government sector employee income, which I don't think is a horrible idea. The cap that the NDP had proposed was $418,000, which is a lot of money. It's a big chunk of cheese to make. And in a similar kind of thread, people have called for these general career bandwidth. The idea that a professor will only make 80 to 120 grand is a good idea, I think, in some ways, because it'll decrease competition between government organizations. And it's attractive to me and maybe other taxpayers because these top earners really account for the large chunk of the money passing through the Sunshine List. So by capping them down would actually be a huge savings overall. I even saw one paper from 2015 saying that if we implemented this cap, it would save us $100 million a year. And that was in 2015. So it would save us way more now, I imagine. Of course, for inflation charts, this cap would need to be revisited, but $418,000 is twice what the premier makes right now. So I think that's a reasonable cap for a while. I think a viable alternative for some academics is just making the Sunshine List still, but making it not publicly accessible and just leaving it to a third-party reviewer that's unbiased to provide to the government. Only those who can actually make changes with the list have access to it, and we're not just providing it to the public who have no power to control it, really, or no government sway kind of to control or change the outcomes might be more beneficial and have more utility. This idea of the public really not having utility with the list is very interesting, because even from those two cases we looked at, the Amit Shakma and the Dr. Chris Mazza scandal, I think both of those are times where the public had like their alarm bells up, like something weird was happening, something suspect was happening, and they needed to investigate and kind of push the government and other institutions to look into it. So I wouldn't say the public has zero influence on the Sunshine List. Do we have the most influence? Probably not. And like, yes, maybe we don't need to know what our teacher, our bedside nurse, our best friend makes at their job, but unfortunately governments have proven themselves to be kind of untrustworthy, and having the power as a citizen to understand what's going on with your government is really important, in my opinion anyway. Honestly, I'd love to hear any other alternatives you heard of, or if you're really a big fan of the Sunshine List, give me some explanation and context as to why you're a fan and why you think we should keep it. I think it's a really big discussion to have, and I think we need to keep having it until we found out like what is the perfect situation for this province. Ontario is a complex place with a lot of different communities, a lot of different government structures and employees coming and going all the time, and really having a meaningful way to keep a track of everything with our government I think is super important. I will leave links below so you can see the Sunshine List and all my references. Thank you so much for joining me. Please like and subscribe for further Canadian-based content, because there is a ton coming your way. I am just having so much fun exploring these different Canadian topics, and I'd love for you to join me. Until next time, please be well, do well, stay well. Bye.